The World Health Organization says like 93% of disease is stress related. 90+% of doctor visits are also stress related. So there's this really interesting correlation of like how stress is affecting people.
We ask all of our guests, if somebody's listening to this and they can do one thing today to improve their health, what would that one thing be? Hey everyone, Derek Hines here. Welcome to the podcast where I'll share with you the patterns, insights, research, and technologies that we use in my own pain and performance practice to help people improve their health, speed their healing, and increase their longevity. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy it. All right, Miss Swirl Jordan Moore Williams, welcome to the Pain and Performance Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here.
I'm excited to have you here. You have a litany of experience and I guess areas. It was almost an embarrassment of riches that I could kind of pull out of all the different kind of areas that you have expertise in. But why don't we start with you kind of telling us your I guess initial steps into kind of your health journey and where that's led you today.
Yeah, so it really started when I was about 15 years old, and I was suicidal, and I attempted suicide 2 separate times in very different ways, and neither time worked. However, they didn't work as far as like the instant death goes. It was more of like a slow death, it really increased the degeneration and deterioration that was having in my body. So even though I didn't fully die, I was still like, okay, I'm alive, and I guess I'm alive for a reason. So, because that's what the doctors had told me too, was like, well, anyone else would be dead, so you must be here. You must have some special purpose in this life. And I was like, okay, I'd never really thought about that before, up until that point. And so I was working through some mental health around, depression, spiritual crisis, all of these things around not even understanding that I could have a purpose to, okay, now I guess I have one, but what is that and how do I find it? While then my body slowly started to shut down. So I stopped digesting food super well, got underweight, lost a lot of muscle mass, and I started having severe back pain, debilitating back pain, to where some days I couldn't get out of bed. Some days I couldn't stand up straight. I couldn't hold myself up. Some days I couldn't be touched. I couldn't hug another human. And that became its own challenge as my mental health was starting to shift, and I was starting to enjoy my experience of being human and living within myself and understanding my mental, emotional, and spiritual bodies and self. My physical body was creating a lot of problems for me. And
what was, so when you started to get to
16?
What was before we get into the physical stuff, going through that at such a young age, I feel like is a difficult thing anyway. But having seen some younger family members kind of go through some of this and come out on the other end very healthy and in a good place, what were you doing at that time? What was some of the stuff that you tried where obviously you go through something like that? I'm sure there's therapy and there's a lot in there. But what was the next steps out of that to start that kind of path to recovery?
Yeah, there was definitely the classic steps of being, released from the hospital once my body could support itself, to being in an inpatient program, having my mental health, diagnosed basically, and then even into an outpatient program where I was really being monitored a lot, and then almost became like an experiment of different drugs, of what they thought like was wrong with me. So there'd be a diagnosis, and then they'd give me a drug for that. And then if it didn't work or nothing would happen, nothing would shift, then they're like, oh, okay, misdiagnosed, must be this thing. And I went through a couple years of that process, and to really not have much work for me, because ultimately what I found out in the end as I grew within myself, I found that mental health is just like any other aspect of your health. And even though at one point there was, a distortion and some mental illness there, ultimately I was healing that. And so there wasn't really a drug that could help me. It was more of working on an internal level with my thoughts, and my like understanding. Like, something I love to tell people is to not believe their thoughts. Like, don't believe what you think, because there's thought fields just floating through, and we think like 100,000 different thoughts a day, and most of them are not even our own thoughts, and most of them are not even true. They're just kind of passing through. But when we get stuck on specific thoughts, especially when we're in fear and have other emotions that begin to play into it, then though it's like those thoughts dwell and swell up and start to take over. And so for me, it was really navigating, how do I want to experience myself? How do I want to experience the world around me if I'm going to be here? Then I kind of want to enjoy myself. I don't want to feel like I'm a victim to my circumstances. And I think really making that conscious choice, having that awareness that that's not really the quality of life I'm looking for, and I want to have a good time. Like, and it's not just about like being happy and feeling joy. I actually wanted to just feel my spectrum of emotions. I had become really numb.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really feeling much sensation as far as on an emotional level. I was pretty apathetic, and rarely laughed, rarely cried, just, numb is the best way I can describe it. And I just didn't want that. I didn't understand why I was so desensitized. And it could have been, the mixture of different pharmaceutical drugs that was being played with within my mind, and having chemical imbalances. And I do feel like it was really a choice, coming into that and telling myself, understanding that I wanted something different than kind of what was like being fed to me.
Was that just like a self-awareness that came out? How did you get to that point? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say it was really definitely a self-awareness. I'm have an internal rebel. I'm a pretty rebellious person. I don't like really, and I'm sure most people are like this. I don't really like being told what to do. And I just felt like I didn't want to be just put into these different boxes and told that this was how I am. And like with every diagnosis and then misdiagnosis, I was like, you guys aren't even making any sense anymore. Like, you're just you're like reading out of a textbook that was written however long ago, trying to tell me that I fit in this box, so this drug is going to help me, but then the drug didn't. So I think it was like kind of through that process, and just having, like you said, that self-awareness and being like, I don't know. I don't think any of you, like you, as far as like the doctors and therapists and people who were trying to treat me, it felt like they didn't really know me. And they didn't know what was actually going on for me. And there wasn't really a way for me to even like tell them that either. So I went through the process kind of, I played the game is what it felt like to me. I'm like, okay, I'm going to tell them what they want to hear. I'm going to do the things I'm supposed to do so that I don't have to do this anymore. And I can start making real changes on my own.
So did you ever have any kind of beneficial professional therapy or anything? Did you find any of that was helpful?
Eventually, yeah. I mean, I like talk therapy. I thought that it was nice to talk to somebody who kind of just listened, and that didn't really have much, feedback, but would kind of guide me into more of my own expression, kind of like my own little ahas.
Yeah.
And I thought that was helpful, but it didn't really help me heal. Yeah. It wasn't until I started really getting into more somatic practices that I started feeling deeper levels of healing, and even in my mental space, that it was like, oh, like all of a sudden, like I could just like actually clear myself and clear those negative thoughts and change those negative self-talk and all of these different patterns that had been happening. So I'm not like putting down, talk therapy by any means. It was helpful. And I think it's super beneficial especially because people just need to be listened to often. They just need someone to listen to them.
Well, it's always a tough thing because it's like we have such a high correlation of complex pain issues with stress, anxiety, and depression, right? I mean, it's the highest correlation of anything, higher than anybody's images, higher than MRIs or any of the problems we look at physically. All of those things are kind of a coin flip. Is the person going to have pain? But if we have people go through and just do like an assessment, that's just simple questions, and we find that they have higher amounts of stress, anxiety, or depression, there's a direct correlation with that and complex or chronic pain issues. So it's one of the tough things in healthcare.
Yeah, well, and that's ultimately in the long run, years later, fast forward a decade, about a decade, I found a modality that led me to the brain and stress and started being educated about how stress affects the brain. And it was like I already knew this information. Like I had kind of found it along my path of along my path of wellness, but the way that it was explained to me was just like, that makes so much sense. And so finding out about how basically our brains only have two brain modes. We have a growth and repair mode. That's when we rest. That's when we digest. And then we have a protective mode. That's our survival mode. That's our fight, flight, freeze. And we can only be in one mode at a time. So once I understood that, okay, that's how our brains work, and then understanding the correlation with stress, specifically modern stress, because how our brains are adapted is to what we call primitive stress. It's very simple. It's something that has a clear beginning and a clear ending. We are designed for this. We are adapted to it. And however, it's more of a primitive type of stress. So our hunter-gatherer bodies are ready for simple stressors. We're designed to go into that protection mode 20 to 30 minutes max, and then the threat go away. We see that clear ending, and come back into our growth and repair stage or mode. And that is, like I said, we're perfectly adapted to that. We're designed to do that. Unfortunately, stress is no longer that simple. Stress is becoming more and more complex as we become, more modern, and we have more of this modern lifestyle, things that our hunter-gatherer bodies had never dealt with before, from EMFs to traffic to cell phones, and someone even having like a rageful like video that we can watch, to even having a traumatic memory, all of these different things, even just like an unexpected bill, right? Like the refrigerator stops working. Like, okay, well, we have to do something about that. And so all of these things keep happening. So there's many, many beginnings, but there's no clear ending. It's just perpetual, constantly happening over and over. And so there's never that like all good signal. So the brain doesn't know the difference. It doesn't know the difference between something imminent, literally like, being attacked by, it's like an animal in those primitive times, and all of those other examples I just said. It's literally the same to the way that our brain perceives things. So then when we have this modern complex stress happening and there's no end to it, we end up getting locked into that stress state. We get stuck into that protection mode. And when we're in a protection mode, the brain actually lateralizes into one hemisphere. And what that means is that it allocates energy away from the threat. So that way, if the threat's coming at me from over here, I'm going to put all my energy into this hemisphere in case there's damage to this side. That means there's weakness, kind of like a brownout on the opposite hemisphere. This hemisphere controls the opposite side of the body, this hemisphere, this side of the body. So there's weakness on one side because of that. And then the other side has this constriction. It's ready to fight or flight. Like, okay, we either got to go or we're going to fight this. We're going to come into that fighter stance, right? And we end up having all of this tension and constriction because we're lateralized into one hemisphere, and usually also back into the hindbrain. Very high beta brain waves happening at this point in that one hemisphere. Like I said, the other hemispheres in a brownout, there's very little brain waves happening of any wavelength. And when this happens, the body is in protection mode. It's designed to do this. The brain wants to survive. So things like digestion, respiration, cell production, immune function, that goes on the back burner. Those things aren't important if you need to survive. When that happens, blood's in the limbs, no longer in the viscera, and everything's kind of working at a lower level just so that we can get by, because we just need to survive at that point. The longer we're locked into that state, the longer we have this complex stress, it becomes chronic. And then we're in this chronic stress state that begins to accumulate stress. And we're not able to fully release and restore even when we sleep. We're not getting into the highest levels of delta where that regeneration and that rest happens. And so once I understood kind of like the science of stress and the way that our brains are working and how therefore it's affecting our body and creating not just tension, but distortion and lower levels of function to all of our main systems, then it started to make more sense to me why there would be, so much pain. And it's like, if one side is like hiked up, for every half inch that the of distortion that we see, if like one hip is raised up, that's going to add like 10 pounds of weight just dealing with gravity. And a lot of our brain's energy is just dealing with being in a gravitational field. Like a lot of our energy has to go into that because the eyes want to stay level.
Right.
So once that this is what was happening, I was like, okay, how can we get out of this state?
Yeah, I think that would be, I would love to, like, explore that part of it. So like you hit a lot of that right on, and it's just, that's I think something that a lot of people deal with today is like it's just this constant barrage of stressors that our brain thinks we're under attack. And in some of that signal is physical. It's like my brain's got to tell me that something's going on, and you're not paying attention to some of these signals. So if you don't pay attention, I'm going to start sending signals in other ways.
Exactly.
How was what was the process of digging out of that?
So it actually was really simple. I found a modality that is called AlphaBiotics, and it's not a treatment or a fix-it system or a cure or anything. It just is a modality that works with communicating with the brain. The philosophy, it's actually an applied philosophy, and the philosophy is that the brain is the head of the command. It's like energy comes in, the brain is sending the signals, and that sends to the nerves control the fascia controls the tissue, and the tissue the muscles, and then the muscles move bones. So there's like this chain of command within our body, and it's all really starting from the brain. So what this modality does is it's a hands-on technique that pushes this button on the brain, which is the main nerve ganglion here that goes right into the limbic system. And it's just sending a signal into the brain, giving that all good signal. And in 0.4 seconds, the brain will like power down and come up again. It's kind of like turning on a light switch, or like your computer. If your computer starts to malfunction, it's like had an update and you got all these windows running. Like, what do you do when it starts to fade? You just reset it, and then it pops up and it's working great. Same with all of our devices, and our brains are like our computers. So with this modality, you just push the reset button, and the brain then scans the field, recognizes that it's not in imminent danger, that, oh, okay, and goes back into whole brain function. Once it's back in whole brain function, it moves into the forebrain, into our human level of function, and the body follows into balance. Immediately, blood comes back into the viscera, structural distortion, biomechanical balance is restored, so the distortion goes away, tension is dropped, and all systems start to function better. Even the blood starts to clear and flow better.
So explain that. Were you at is there a practitioner that you would go to, and then y'all would okay, let's feel, let's work on this, let's find, is there dysfunction up here, adding pressure, what's the treatment like? I haven't heard of that. I'm interested.
Exactly. And so that's what I did. And I met a practitioner who explained all of this to me, and it was a really interesting story, just because this person also is my husband now. So it's like how I met my husband. But this woman was in a conversation with me, and I'm just sharing about life and different topics that excite me, and she keeps asking me if I know this person, this man, and I was like, no, I don't. And the third time that she asks me if I know this guy, I'm like, no, I don't, but maybe I should, because you keep bringing him up and it sounds like maybe I should meet him. So she just makes an introduction, a meeting for us. I have no idea what I'm going to do. I just know this person's name. I'm like, okay. So I go meet him, and he gives me my first alignment. And that's what we call it, is an alignment unification process. It unifies the hemispheres of the brain and the brain with the body. So, and I knew instantly, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to do this work. And I guess clearly there was something about him that I was like, I need to hang out with this person too. And that was really the beginning for me. I knew right away, not just did I have an experience of my brain coming on full power, whole brain function in my body, the balance in my body being restored, and feeling my equal power to both sides of my body. It was amazing. We use a series of like tests, we call it teaching through testing, to measure how stress is affecting the body. Then we do the alignment, we do the same test, and we can see now the brain is out of that state. So it's like measurable for us to see the difference. And ultimately, I just knew that this was not just something I wanted to receive and wanted in my life, but I wanted to offer this work. And so I went through my training, I became an AlphaBioticist, and have gone through the process where now I'm even an instructor. And my husband and I actually teach this work together. And I love it. I love it. It's like, it's amazing to help people out of this locked in stress state, especially when they feel like there's nothing, they've tried everything. I love when I hear that, because I hear it a lot. People come to me and they're like, oh, I've tried everything and nothing helps, or this only helps a little bit, or that. And I just guide people to, if this is right for them, there is a process of seeing if this is, a process that will work for them. And also that everything they're already doing, this is only going to help. Because once their brain is fully on, then they're connected to the innate wisdom of the body, which we believe that the power that makes the body is the power that heals the body. The body is a self-healing, self-regenerating, self-restorative vessel that has the capabilities to heal itself. So we don't believe that anyone else can heal anybody else, but you can heal yourself. And
that is incredibly powerful truth for people to wrap around. Whenever I hear that somebody says they've tried everything, it's almost like they've tried everything in one section. So like if they come to you with chronic pain, I've tried everything. But when you really dig into that, they've tried a bunch of physical treatments. I've tried all these physical treatments, right? Or I've tried all these injection or medical treatments, or I've tried all these exercise treatments. They really have somebody told them that it was a physical problem, so they just did a bunch of those things. And then if you're come above that, they're like, you've done everything physical and it didn't work. Maybe there's something else that's going on here.
And that's how it is too. I mean, I have people who are even in like a spiritual crisis, having people come and they're, they just feel like they're at the end of their rope as far as the stress that they're under, say, they're going through a divorce, and they're like, I've literally had this happen with a client. He's going through a divorce, living out of his car, trying to figure out what the next steps are, because they thought that it was going to work, but then it wasn't working, and and then it compounds, just like I was explaining before, where it's so he's not sleeping well, he's not sleeping comfortably, he's emotionally distraught because he's in this process of losing the life that he had formed with his wife, and then how is he gonna be able to see his kids and all of these things, and it just piles on, and then he's like, I gotta go to work, I gotta figure out how I'm gonna get a new place to live, and all these things, and it just is all of this really intense stress that's happening, and it's affecting him in every aspect of his being, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And so helping him out of that stress state into the whole brain function, it was immediately, it was lights came back on for him. He was like, oh my gosh, the world is brighter. And I was like, yeah, that's mainly because there's no longer, there's actual, a good amount of blood flow happening to the brain and whole brain function. And we can look at it on a physical level, and we can look at it on an energetic and even a metaphysical level too, that he's now been fully aligned. He's 100% power optimized.
Yeah.
Optimized to now handle what is going on. We can't take stressors away. That's not going to happen. Modern life is continuing on, but we can help people adapt to the stressors that they're having. And then of course we can add other things that help too, because there's tons of things that help, especially once you're back in a balanced state.
Yeah, I mean, I think one is like getting your body to be able to handle those, right? You know, like we talk about hormesis a lot on here, and it's like there's a lot of things where you kind of give your body a little bit of that stress and it builds its muscle to overcome stress, right? But if you're already in this kind of chronic state where your body's like, look, I'm just trying to keep my head above water. And then you start trying to add on these little, you know, exercise or cryotherapy or sauna or fasting or whatever your kind of hormetic stressor is. If you're not there yet, I think we have put the cart before the horse. We haven't gotten you into a position where you can actually incorporate that into your system yet. What's that like? What would it look like for, you know, like you can take your first session, but like somebody who comes in and is working with you, what's that first session look like? You know, is it kinesiology testing? What is the kind of assessment?
So first visit it's pretty simple. They come in, they fill out their paper where we do a solid intake, especially of like the history of where they're coming from and their main stressors. So just so we can see what has happened and like what's got them to where they are right now coming to see us. Then there's a piece of education where we like to explain, kind of similar to how I just explained to you about our brains and about stress, so that they can understand how stress is usually the culprit. In fact, the World Health Organization says like 93% of disease is stress related. And 90+% of doctor visits are also stress related. So there's this really interesting correlation of like how stress is affecting people. It is the biggest problem that humanity is facing. So we have to educate people because oftentimes they're really concerned about their symptoms.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. Whether it's the emotional state that they're in, the physical pain, their digestion's not working. There's a plethora of things that people have going on because they've been locked in a stress state. So we really have to be with them and help them see how potentially the things that are happening are because of stress, because of the stress in their lives, so that they can start to understand that we are not looking to treat their symptoms. We don't treat or heal or cure anything. And the system is actually designed to make people believe that someone else can fix them. And you're going to go get this treatment. Someone's going to fix me. I'm going to feel better and it's going to be great. I'm going to get healed. That's literally how we're designed, or how the society has been programming us throughout the paradigm. And we really kind of hold a new paradigm through our applied philosophy. And so we really have to educate and get people to see that they are self-healing. The power is within them. They're just not fully connected to it because they're locked in this stress state. So once we answer all the questions, people feel really comfortable with our process and what's going on, then we move into a table. And it's a patented design table. It's kind of like a small, thinner massage table that is like slanted. And so we go through this series of tests, and it's not exactly kinesthetic tests. It's not really muscle testing. It's more of like a voltage test. So we just want to see, is the power on or not? Is it getting from the brain to the body, and on which side? So we start at the ankles, at the inner malleolus, and we just see where's the height of it. And quite often when measured, we see something, like if you're watching and not listening, you can see that like my thumb's kind of above the other one, and we'll see that in someone's leg. It will appear short. Yeah. It's not really short. Only like 0.3% of people actually have an anatomically short leg. However, they're told often that they do have a short leg, and that's not the case. So then we go to the hips to verify like what we're seeing at the ankles, the leg height hip height, is it the same as what we saw on the ankles? Quite often we do. We see this raised up hip. Then we'll measure a hip rotation, and we're just doing this with our hands and our eyes, like visually seeing. We like to call it obnosis, the power of observation. And we will measure to see, which hip is rotated. Thank you. It's not mine. It came from the founder of AlphaBiotics, actually.
Gotcha.
So we'll see oftentimes that the hips ones are rotated forward and lifted or back. Like everyone has their own kind of like holding patterns. So really we do these tests to see, what is this person's holding pattern? How is the stress pattern playing out in this person's body? From there, we do that voltage test, a power test. It's not really a muscle test, but we have them lift their leg up and we have them hold it up while we give it a little bit of resistance. And it's like, not even 3 seconds of a test, because we just want to see, is it firing? Is it able to hold itself up? And then we do the other leg and we ask them what they noticed. It's often quite noticeable for the practitioner, but we ask the person who's receiving because we want them to feel what's going on. Their body is the one that's experiencing this distortion. So we want them to be more aware of it, because when we're locked in that hindbrain and lateralized, there's a lower level of brain function and people are not super present. It's actually like more challenging to be present because of it. So we bring them into it. Like we want them to tell us what they felt versus us telling them. From there, we move to the arms and we do a little bit of traction on the arms and we do a measurement. Just like we measured the legs, we measure the arms. And quite often we'll see something like this, where one arm is higher than the other. And it's not a finger thing. It's like looking at the wrist, like one's higher than the other. So we see that distortion that I was talking about, where one side is raised up. This is happening because when we're in that stress state, there's about 9 to 13 places along the spine that will start to compensate and have more and more and more and more tension. So we'll like be kind of cranked up, and we can see this. Then we do a power test on the arms. Same thing. We just want to see, is the brain firing to the arms? Can the arm hold itself up when I try to push it down? Usually one side doesn't have very much power, one side does. Sometimes there's extra pain, sometimes it's tweaky, sometimes there's all kinds of things that happen. There's lots of stress patterns. But the typical one is that one side will be higher and that side will actually have more power, and then the other side will be weaker. Then we move to the neck and we just palpate for tension. Same thing, I'm not trying to massage or do anything to like release the tension at this point. I'm just checking. What does the tissue feel like? And how does it feel to the client, to the person on the table? Is it painful? Is it painful on both sides? Is it tender? How are they feeling about it? Quite often we see tension on both sides of the neck, but one side more than the other. Often can both be painful. It just depends on the person. And then we'll do a neck rotation. And same thing, we just want to see how is the neck rotating and what does that feel like to the person? Is it like getting caught? Does it feel easier to go to one side than the other? And that's it. We just note what we observed. And then we do the alignment process. We'll demonstrate it first. Give it show them what it's like, what it will be like, because it is a hands-on like assisted movement to the head, sending the signal through our hand. And with their consent, if they're like, okay, that sounds great, I'm ready for this, then we'll do the alignment process. Then we run back through those same tests and we notice the difference and we let them notice the difference. And that's basically it. Then we help them off the table. We explain a little bit more about what's going on for them and what could happen. Then we reschedule for a couple days later, because most people will hold their balance 72 to 78 hours in like the modern lifestyle. Most people. Some people will hold longer, some people less. It just depends. So what we like to see people in 2 days, so that way we're seeing them still in balance. we have a chart that we use that we gauge the stage that they're in. And based on how much tension has built up in those couple of days, and if they maintained the balance or not, then we determine on the second visit what a frequency would be to help them restore, to help them recover and release the accumulated stress that's been built up in their lives, and recommend a frequency for them to get the best results if that's if it's something that worked for them.
I always love whenever I've like heard or talked to people from very different backgrounds that circle back to like very similar treatment things, because you're like, well, we shouldn't have come across the same answer if like one person started from like the brain and another person started from the body, and one person started from fascia and another person started from physical therapy or something like that. But even in the past probably 6 months, I've had some quite advanced, whether it's physical therapists, medical doctors, osteopaths, neurologists, and what you just described, they would say it in different terms and stuff like that, but would be a quite similar look if you weren't talking and you were going through an assessment of like, is this person's body in a capacity to heal? And all of these backgrounds have come from like just wildly different philosophies and areas. So whenever I see that, it always kind of excites me, because you're like, look, whenever we come from different backgrounds and we end up with the same answer, I think there's something there. I think we should pay attention. And the body being in balance gives us such a leg up whenever we're trying to tell it to heal. I was reading a study, I think it was day before yesterday. In people who exercise, the faster that they get back to a parasympathetic state, the more muscle growth that they have.
Yeah.
So you look at that and you're like, okay, well, that's interesting. Well, what that means is like, if you go and hit the gym and then you get home and you're like stressed about work that day and like, stressed about what you're going to do and stuff, like you just shot yourself in the foot for whatever you were trying to do health wise, in a very big way. So like we talk about these things and it sounds a little bit maybe kind of like on the fringe of what our understanding is. But when we look at it like scientifically, the data is there that these things very powerfully affect our outcomes of what we're doing, whether that's physical treatment, chemical treatment, medical treatment, surgical treatment, and certainly kind of, hands-on or coming from a healing standpoint. I love that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that parasympathetic is that rest and digest growth repair mode that I was talking about. So it makes 100% like sense to me that if someone worked out, that if they're not able to get from that place of physical activity in the sympathetic into parasympathetic, they're not going to have the growth and repair like optimally. Not saying that they won't have it, they just won't have a lot of it.
Yeah.
So, or as much as they could, within that potential. So that's exactly what we're talking about here. The main thing is that what we're doing is helping people have the flexibility to go from parasympathetic to sympathetic easily and on their own, instead of getting locked so deep in a sympathetic state that they don't even ever fully get into parasympathetic again. Or if they do, it's quite short-lived, versus being the opposite, where we're supposed to kind of be in parasympathetic a lot of the time. Yeah. And in sympathetic when we really need to, but have the adaptation to go into both brain modes on our own. And so what
are some of the things for that? Like, you go through treatment and you help somebody probably get past the blocks and some of these kind of entrenched pathways that are keeping them out of that. But once somebody comes out of that, what's the stuff that helps them stay in balance from a sympathetic to parasympathetic? What are some of the activities they can put in their lives?
Yeah, so that's a great question. But yeah, I mean, it's like definitely great to maintain alignment once you get into it. The longer you're in alignment, the more things will restore and release that accumulated stress. But there are different things that can be done. And one of the things that we found that we love to marry with AlphaBiotics is called EDU. And it's an evolutionary spinal maintenance program that's literally designed to move and toggle every vertebrae of the spine, moving the cerebral spinal fluid, making it stronger, more flexible and malleable, and as well as moving the energy through. And one of the key things and why it works so well to help maintain balance is that it uses a lot of cross body motion. So like I said earlier, the side of the brain controls the opposite side of the body and vice versa. So when we actually cross the midline of our body with our arms, then it forces the hemispheres to talk to each other through the corpus callosum. And that helps maintain that balance, not just through the hemispheres, but also from the brain and body. So there's a deeper communication happening, neuroplasticity and even neurogenesis happening while the brain is being forced to communicate with itself. Simultaneously, the practice is also designed to really strengthen the core of the body, the central column, the main pillars. So this is energetic. This is like known as like the pranic tube or the jet, depending on, whatever practice or tradition you're looking at, but it's this central column of the body that our energy runs through. That also is where our spine, our spinal column, and our spinal cord run through as well. And so the better strength and flexibility that the core of us has is also the greater resiliency and the greater adaptability. So that is one of the reasons that we found that we just love this practice. First of all, it feels good, and it's the only practice that I found as far as a physical movement that actually took away the last of the back pain that I was in after doing so many different things. Also, it's like a spiritual practice and a meditation and all these things like all in one. And that also worked for me because I got a lot going on and we're all busy humans. We've got all this stuff happening. And so for me, being able to kind of stack my practices into one, like cut down the time every day that I needed to tend to myself. So I was trying to tend to myself for hitting every level, right? Because I was understanding that I'm a whole being and I have a mental body and a spiritual body and an emotional body and my physical body, and I have to tend to them all or my quality of life goes down. That's just what I learned. I had to learn it the hard way, but that's what I learned.
The edu practice, is it like the same kind of moves that you go through? I'm sure there's a lot to it, but is it like a sequence and you kind of like try and perfect the moves?
Yeah, it actually is. It's a sequence of moves that is told through a story. So that's part of what makes it really fun because you get to use your imagination, and for me, that's fun. I like using my imagination, and I like stories and imagining different things happening all while I'm moving my body and thinking about things. And it actually helps, for me, it helps me do the practice because I'm like, especially in the beginning when I first started, if there wasn't a story going on, I'd be like, how did I move that long, my spine that long? To go through this sequence of movements. But yeah, there's a series of movements that are put together in a very fluid way. So there's not much staccato throughout the sequence, but it becomes very much a flow. And through that sequence, through the story, like I said, you're just moving and toggling every little vertebrae, and that is innervating and lubricating all those intervertebral discs. And those are super important for our well-being, for our health, for our spinal cord to innervate our nerves, to keep our bones apart from each other. And so what it did was help me actually regenerate the discs in my spine, because I had been diagnosed at 16 with degenerative disc disease, as well as fibromyalgia and all these other things, all these other diagnoses, and told I'd be in a wheelchair by the time I was 30. And I was like, there's my rebel coming out, of like, no way. Yeah. Nope.
I love it. So that would be something that y'all, like somebody would come and learn the program with you, and then they're taking that and you're like, look, do this. Is it daily? Is that?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, once you know the practice, you make it your own. That's one of the things I love about it. Cause like, I don't want anyone to be like dependent on me.
Yeah, you're a rebel. You're like, yeah.
Heal. I love empowering people. And so once you know the practice, you can just do it whenever you want. Of course, it's maintenance. It's evolutionary spinal maintenance. And so the more you maintain, the better you'll feel, the better results that you'll have. So I do recommend doing it daily, even if it's just a couple movements. Maybe if you don't even have time for the full sequence. But once you know the story, like my practice, I can do the full edu sequence in about 17 minutes is my average. I've timed it many times. And when I'm teaching a class, I draw it out. We go more into the story. We do extra repetitions, and it can be, 45 minutes long. Yeah. But it doesn't have to be. And so we've designed a online program that is all pre-recorded so that people can just learn the sequence at their own pace. Also, because moving your spine in this way is very different than any other movement practice out there. It has similarities to others, but it's very different at the foundation than any other movement practice. And so when people haven't moved their spines like this before, a lot starts to transform, a lot starts to change, because you're starting to work that core. Working those intervertebral discs. And so we have it as like a self-paced thing. And we recommend you do like a module a week. And then that way you're building up, and it's designed to build on itself. So you learn this part of the sequence, and then you learn the next part, but you add that part to the first part. So it like builds till you just know the whole thing. Every move, the whole sequence, the whole story.
That's fantastic. Where can people find that, Swirl?
They can find that at vitalistproject.com. That's our website. That's vitalistproject.com. Vitalist Project. And it's called Moving Back into Balance. It's an edu immersion, all out there, fully ready to go. Because we were teaching it only live, trainings and different things, and we were just like, man, we really even need to help people, like have people have more access instead of waiting on us to be able to teach. We still do in-person trainings and things as well, because we love humans and we love being with people. And so we do that as well, but we designed this for people to be able to just learn at home and make it their own.
I love it. Swirl, thank you. I love what y'all are putting. There's so much of the interconnection in physical and mental. And I think one of the downfalls of healthcare is like, it's hard to talk about, and it takes explanation, and it takes sitting and kind of talking about here's how stress impacts this. So I love what y'all are doing. I think that is really like the next level of healthcare. As we talk about precision medicine, everybody thinks that means like precision in terms of treating these perfect little things, but it's so much more than that when we're actually treating people and not like the physical meat bag that we're in.
Exactly. So much more than our meat bags.
I appreciate everything that y'all are putting out there. We ask all of our guests, if somebody's listening to this and they can do one thing today to improve their health, what would that one thing be?
I would say if you could do one thing today to improve your health, that would be to take some deep breaths. Just take a moment, especially if you're feeling panicked or anxiety or pain or anything. Just like take a moment, take a pause, bring yourself into presence through your breath and breathe into it. Breathe into the moment, breathe into the pain, whatever it might be, and see what shifts.
That is a fantastic answer. And I think that even just what's the 3 breaths? There's research on the 3 breaths. Like if you feel like you're stressed and you take 3 breaths, like it'll lower that kind of fight or flight response to some degree. So really good. So we mentioned the vitalistproject.com. Is it just Vitalist or the Vitalist Project?
Vitalist Project.
Vitalistproject.com. Are y'all on social? Can people follow y'all?
Yeah, you can find us at Vitalist Project.
Awesome.
Yep.
Yep. And we will tag everything in the show notes. Swirl, thank you so much. I know we had some technical difficulties, but I really appreciate you. Perseverance is one of your superpowers, I think, after all of this stuff. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing some amazing information. You've done awesome. And I agree with the doctors from the very beginning. I think you have a lot of purpose and a lot of impact left to give in the world. So thank you so much, Swirl.
Thank you. Be well.